Welcome, everyone. This is Sri Krishnamurthy from Quant University, and I welcome you to the final session of the Quant University Fall School guest lecture series. Today, we are fortunate to have Brad Franklin from FactSet, James Perkins from Refinitiv, and Yaacov Weinstock, who's been a great friend and a mentor and an advisor for a really long time. And in today's session, we're going to cover some of the noise out there on like what are these APIs, and everyone's talking about alternative APIs. Everyone wants to use APIs in their quantitative investments workflow, and we have had so many discussions kind of discussing AI, machine learning, various ways in which you can incorporate modeling into your workflows. And in today's session, we'll talk about how do you operationalize some of these workflows within the enterprise. How do you think about bringing in the data and the modeling pieces together? And how do you leverage the ecosystem of different products and services which are out there, and then bring them all together and operationalizing your workflows? As you know, when quants start building financial applications, you have to connect various pieces. You have the data piece, you have the modeling piece, you have to think about your ideas and what does it mean in the context of the portfolios and the ideas you're working on. How do you experiment with it? How do you rapid prototype with all these aspects? And one of the things we are trying to do here at Quant University is try to see what are the latest trends which are out there, and how can you bring them all together and make it available to reduce the friction within the enterprise when you're operationalizing these quant workflows. So today, we'll start out with brief introductions on various aspects about what does API means in the context of the workflows from Refinitiv's perspective, from Yaacov comes from a perspective of how does a CTO in an organization think about various data sources when you're making systems and processes available for quants and investment managers. And then Brad's going to come from the perspective of how FactSet is seeing the world in the context of open APIs. So I'm going to share a couple of slides in here for people who are attending the Quant University Fall School Lecture Series for the first time. Welcome. For people who have been with us for a long time, we have this is the 18th session of the year. Welcome back, and I hope you've enjoyed the series and you've learned and also gotten a good idea of the various innovations which are happening in the AI ML space, especially in the context of financial services. And we hope today's session is going to get you some more insights about what's the state of the art with respect to APIs out there, and how does alternative data and various other aspects fit into the enterprise. So for people who don't know us, we are Quant University. We're based out of Boston, Massachusetts. Well, in today's day and age, I don't think geographical locations matter anymore, but I welcome you. We have had people from 13 different countries. We focus primarily on the intersection of data science, machine learning, and finance. We have operated as a consultancy and a training advisory for the past 7 years, and we have expanded into building out products. And I'm going to give you a brief demo of the Q Sandbox, which is powering the Q Academy when we run our courses. But in addition to that, we are creating a platform to bring in the data and the modeling pieces together to facilitate rapid experimentation. And I'd love to get your thoughts about what you think about the platform we are building and exchange some ideas. So this fall, we had multiple courses we offered in partnership with Premia and multiple other organizations. We focused on operationalizing and scaling artificial intelligence within the financial services enterprise. We focused on various themes on explainability, looking at synthetic data generation, looking at fintech and other aspects about operationalizing some of the key areas of key areas and the challenges of bringing in machine learning within the enterprise. And we're also gearing up for the winter school in 2021, wherein we are going to be bringing out many more courses. And if you go to www.quantuniversity.com, we have a brand new site, and we have the whole course catalog and all the other courses and the workshops we're going to be conducting in January. And today, as I mentioned, we have James from Refinitiv, Brad from FactSet, and Yaacov, who are going to be talking about the various aspects on how they see the whole area of alternative data and the API jungle from their perspective. And the reason why I want to to put this together is, as we were building out the Q sandbox, we realized that when quants are kind of dealing with this new world wherein software is something which you can access anytime you want. You have open source products which are out there and you can just install and configure and start working with it. You have multiple data sources which you can potentially leverage, and most of them are available now through APIs. Multiple companies are putting together their own APIs, and you have the challenge of bringing all these things together. And what it means is, if you are a chef and you're working with ingredients, you have to now start thinking in the context of recipes rather than sourcing these ingredients, because the ingredients are all there. Now you have to start putting them together. And many a times your experiments may work well. Many a times you may have just to abandon these experiments and go on to newer experiments. And that's where the Q sandbox comes in. And I'm going to give you a brief demo of the sandbox just to kind of get you a feel for how the platform looks. And then I'm going to just hand over the stage to James and Yaacov. So this is the sandbox, and what it does for you is enable you to bring in all the key pieces of the quantitative workflow together. So when you think about what do quants and data scientists typically need within an enterprise, you have multiple APIs available, and it could be from data vendors, it could be your own APIs. For example, we have created multiple APIs for synthetic data generation, for de-identification, for re-identification, for masking and sharing different data sets. But also we have fine-tuned some algorithms for natural language processing, leveraging different call earning transcripts, and also leveraging different APIs from Azure, Amazon, etc. And we also work closely with companies like NVIDIA and MathWorks to leverage their products and technologies so that it's easily accessible in a single platform. And the key piece which we are trying to put all these things together is leveraging the API vault. And what that means is you can have all these APIs kind of be in one place, so that when you start building out your workflows, you can just basically pick the various pieces together and assemble them and start focusing on your use cases. As you know, every API has its own API signature, and it just becomes a challenge to think about leveraging multiple APIs to build out the workflow. And we kind of try to reduce the friction by having all of them in a single platform, so that way you can focus on your idea generation and vetting out your ideas and operationalizing those ideas, rather than the technical pieces of how do you think about the various APIs and putting all of them together. And some of the things we have done is just leveraging best practices of APIs. So we use standard API signatures so that you can basically look at the documentation and work with that, and you can test out various authorization parameters. And also we have put together various reference applications using technologies like Streamlit and other technologies, wherein you could just basically call these and then figure out how these applications work. And then if you like it, you could just basically integrate that into your workflow. So that's a brief demo of the Q sandbox. If anybody is interested in giving it a try or have questions, please reach out to us at info@qsandbox.com, and I'll be happy to engage in the conversation. So without further ado, let's invite our eminent panel for the day. Welcome, James. Welcome, Yaacov. Welcome, Brett, to today's session.
Thank you.
So what we'll do is we will have each one of you introduce yourselves and talk about the things which excite you in the API world and what you've been working on. So that way we can kind of set the stage for the audience on how do you see the world in the context of various APIs. And then we will start with a fireside chat and talk about the various themes about how to put all these things together. Sound like a plan? Cool.
Perfect.
So James, would you want to go first? I'm going to make you the presenter.
Sure.
And you can share your screen. And one thing you got to do is once you finish your presentation, you may have to hand over the baton to me and make me the host so that we can transfer the host privileges to others. Okay. So James, you are the presenter now, so you feel free to share the screen.
Perfect. All right, let's see here. Are you able to see?
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Well, hello, everyone. First off, a big thank you to you, Sri, for the opportunity to be here. And really for the important work that you're doing with Quant University to empower and inform the wider quant community. I've spent most of my career connecting market practitioners with data and technology. And I can tell you that in recent years, with the rise of things like machine learning and AI, developer advocacy, I would say, has increasingly become the focus of our efforts. A little bit about Refinitiv, formerly part of Thomson Reuters, formed in 1851, to actually using carrier pigeons to relay stock quotes, if you can believe it. And you fast forward today, 170 years later, and here we are talking about data science, and we serve more than 40,000 institutions globally. So, just a couple things that I wanted to share on how we look at the quant and developer community, and really what we're doing to empower those communities, right? I think first and foremost, our developer community, Refinitiv developer community, it's a mature, global, far-reaching community, right? With more than 40,000 registered members at this point. We have a very active Q&A forums, articles that you can read and download, documentation, tutorials. It really is a hub of excellence for everything APIs and developer related, right? Want to create a very good, I'll call it almost like a playground, right? And we do have a playground as well in there. So something where we want to make sure developers and quants feel welcome and supported. Secondly, we have the Refinitiv Data Platform, right? Which is our strategic cloud-based platform. And that's really where we house all of our data sets. So currently, it's kind of staggering, but we have more than 100 million different instruments that we price and provide pricing and reference data on. This is also where we store news, ESG, any of our third-party and partner data sets. And then also we provide open source types of tools to access that, right? So something we just launched recently called Codebook is a cloud-based IDE, right? We basically created our own IDE optimized to help and enable communities to really test that data set, right? And as you mentioned, reduce the friction. And then I think, thirdly, really the other exciting thing that we're doing is we have built out the last few years Refinitiv Labs, which is a group of dedicated data scientists that create proofs of concept with customers, co-create, we provide thought leadership. And in fact, from our recent AI ML survey, I think you'll all be happy to hear, although probably not shocked, that 80% of the respondents from the survey that we reached out to say that they are making, quote, significant investments in AI ML technologies. Like I said, not a huge surprise there, but if you want to see the full report, I definitely welcome you to go to the site and download it for free. So, with that, that's really all I had is those 3 points. I think with our developer community, our data platform, and our labs, those are really the 3 things that we're doing, I think, or buckets, I would say, where we're trying to move the needle and help support the communities that you're also trying to support. So I really appreciate the time, and I will pass it over to, I guess, Brad or Yaacov.
Hi, thanks, James. This was excellent. So let's, Brad, do you want to go next?
Sure.
So I'm gonna see if we can. I'm gonna make you the presenter, Brad. Okay, so you can share your screen.
You guys can see my screen?
Yes. Yeah, we can see it.
Great. Hi, my name is Brad Franklin, and I lead our product strategy effort for our Content API suite at FactSet. Our goal in the Content API suite is really to build a modern, performant API interface into all the content that we collect, the content that we aggregate and enhance, as well as the content that we bring in and integrate through our partnerships, and really make that available in a modern API suite. And the Content API is really one element of our FactSet's whole API picture. And that includes certainly our analytics, so portfolio analytics, performance, risk analytics, as well as all the utilities and the engines that support the workflow, from ideation to research to portfolio construction and then evaluation. And so I work very closely with certainly the product and the engineering teams on our content, but as well as the teams that focus on those analytics and enhancements on top of the research and the portfolios that go into the construction process. And so we look at this as a holistic, really suite of APIs that help you meet whatever workflow you're looking to integrate and to really enhance to that digital strategy. So in addition to the endpoints, we have a variety of tools and resources to help clients understand what API solutions we offer, how they can utilize those in various workflows, and then tools to get up and running. And so at developer.factset.com, this is where our catalog of APIs are hosted. And you can identify either by content type or use case or asset class what APIs we offer. And then if you go into the API cards, you can explore live documentation, look at request response models, and then do a lot of testing and understanding what the API can do and how that fits into a workflow. Some examples of that are we created Jupyter notebooks as starter kits to help accelerate onboarding. We see a lot of clients utilizing notebooks as primary initial environments to explore and understand what a content set can do. But depending on the API, it may be BI tools or it may be other SDKs or integrations that are going to be relevant for that workflow. And so what we really want to do is meet the clients where they are, make sure that we're creating an interface that's very easy to integrate into that environment, and use that really industry standards and open API standards to make sure that the API documentation and the integration process is very easy and familiar. So our goal is continue to really expand out this content offering, work closely with the market to make sure that clients are able to get access to this data and to these analytics and functionality in a highly performant way. Sri, I guess I can turn it back over to you.
Oh, thank you, Brad. That was an excellent orientation, and I'm very curious to kind of try out the Jupyter Notebook starter kits, potentially leverage some of those. So Yaacov, I'll make you the presenter in a second. So Yaacov and I, we did some work together more than 10 years ago. And since then, we've been tracking each other, I guess. I've been seeing, Yaacov kind of do amazing things. And he's also very actively involved with the New York CFA Society. And he recently did a panel, and we reconnected, and we've been exchanging ideas since then. And he has some amazing thoughts about how he had kind of, seen the whole ecosystem grow within an organization. When you are kind of building out the technology and the infrastructure platform within an organization, leveraging all these resources. So Yaacov, please share your thoughts.
Am I the presenter?
Yes.
All right, perfect.
Yeah. So,
are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so Sri and I definitely go way back. We worked on a lot of very interesting projects early on in our career. So I started out as a developer, and I must say I'm always happy to hear about developer advocacy programs and API strategies, especially from you guys at Refinitiv and FactSet. I recall early in my career having to reverse engineer and break apart platforms just so I can get at the data and programmatically connect, and probably breach a lot of license agreements at the same time. But things have come a long way, and I thought I'd give a little bit of a view from the other side in terms of actually integrating with and pulling in and gaining value from, we'll call it the alternative data space, or general integration of information. So at Fiera, most recently I was the CTO at Fiera Capital, and Fiera had a large municipal investment book. And what we thought was, how can we go ahead and combine or marry publicly available information with internal research models, and information generated internally to arrive at or to add to our, we'll call it the mosaic of our investment process. And so, there's a lot of publicly available information out there. One can consider what I have presented here, information that can actually be pulled down in this structured way. But there was also a lot of web scraping that had to occur in order to get this done. But the real the place that we started was about, it was about the concept of architecture. And we knew, first of all, that there was a sound thesis around what we were trying to accomplish, because there was a lot of effort done to do this manually. And talent in that regard is critical. And doing these types of initiatives based off of a sound thesis in general is always a good start. But architecture was critical for us as well, because we knew that by the very nature of what we were trying to accomplish, there had to have been a we'll call it an exploratory culture, an environment to be able to find new data sets and integrate it quickly. With exploration and discovery is key. And so how do we go ahead and rapidly ingest new data sets, clean, normalize it, et cetera, without being hindered by operational overhead for the infrastructure that runs the data pipelines. And so the one thing also that we were very cognizant of is the fact that in general, if we wanted to start, the municipal investment space was a place where we were able to tiptoe into this environment, but we wanted to apply it to the other environments and the other asset classes that we had. Quandl, there was a blog post in Quandl back, I had to remember where to find this, and I found it. I was happy I did, with this concept of how do you search for edge with alternative data. And they had this graphic, which you can see, and they have this concept of diffusion of the information. And that is, as alternative data gets presented and is available, the more people, this is a really easy concept to understand, the more it's available, the more people take advantage of it, the less alpha it actually generates, right? It becomes part of the price, it's built into the price and table stakes. And so, how do you, the concept of speed to not only discover, but also use the information was very critical in building out a good program. And so the goal that we set out to do is how do you build end-to-end data pipelines that are easy, what we call easy, frictionless, and self-service. The approach was we wanted to create an architecture that essentially was layered, was component oriented. It created decoupled the concerns. This is all sound architectural practice, but people jump in and can think that they just pull information in and drop it into a database and hope for the best. That's not going to cut it in an environment that has to be nimble and agile. And luckily for everybody, the public cloud providers have actually solved architecture for you. And I'm not sure why people don't use this more, but a lot of all of the public cloud providers, GCP, AWS, Azure, they create these best practices for architecture that you can copy, modify, use on your own. And they're all generally in lockstep on approach. The separation you generally want to have is around the load, because the load will shift and change based on the information you have. The storage, which has to go ahead and horizontally scale based off of the amount of information you put in. The processing, which will change depending on what you do and how your firm evolves, and also the distribution of your information. Because the key is how do you actually exploit this? And that's when we architected this. It was we had store and process was the name of architecture, but consume was our load, and exploit was what we considered the distribute part. And that's really what that layer is supposed to do. Is you have it. How do you exploit it? And in order to exploit it, you have to put it in the hands of the right people at the right time. And so architecture, yes, talent is great, but Architecture is definitely critical. I happen to be just between everyone here, even though we were an Azure shop at Fiera, I happen to be like what AWS has to offer. AWS is the only one that actually added this governance and security layer on top of what they were putting out there, which is you should build almost immediately. You should have a program up front when you're designing this. And then their full, with AWS also, their full architecture is based off of a serverless approach, which allows for, it's easy, it improves the time to market, and also really optimizes the return on investment because the pay for what you use is very granular when it comes to serverless. But either one of these is great. You can also just copy this and build it internally, use this reference architecture and just replace whatever your platforms you are in your own data center. But this is the right approach, we feel, to go ahead and architect an environment.
Okay, cool. So thanks so much, Yaacov. This was an excellent orientation. So now let's get into the fireside chat mode. And I even found a virtual background to simulate a fireside chat. I'm very curious about the whole notion of how is the API world evolving? Because when I kind of started building APIs many years ago, it was more of a technical value proposition. Basically, we're thinking about kind of putting together the frameworks, putting together the APIs to kind of discuss like how do you interface it, and it was mostly thought about from a connection perspective. There was no real strategy, and you were basically trying to use API as a bridge to kind of build the gap. But now, any service I'm looking at has an API offering. When you're thinking about machine learning, there's machine learning as a service. Data as a service. So every service is now kind of offering an API-based interface. Now, how are you looking at the whole world in the context of access? When you're thinking about building out all these APIs. So let's start from there, and then we can continue the discussion.
We're trying to make it easier. I think that's the the short end of it. And Brad will probably agree, right? I mean, it's obviously in everyone's best interest to try to reduce the friction. And I think in the era of open APIs, we kind of have to embrace the openness, right? I mean, there's no reason to do as many proprietary technology things anymore, right? So I'd say, the two most popular APIs that were deliveries anyway right now that we're seeing are, WebSocket and REST. I mean, REST APIs, WebSocket. These are all open, protocols, and I think that's just what clients expect, right? They want that openness, especially with. So there was a question on cloud too. I don't know if we're going to get to that, but that's where that's where our customers are going, right? They want data in AWS. They want to be able to pull things down from GCP or Azure, and so we need to kind of go into that mentality. This is a little bit beyond the scope of this conversation per se, but I don't know how many of you follow, for example, Finos, right? But there is a race just in general to embrace open technology and open connectivity and breaking down barriers, right? So I think APIs is just one more in that series of evolution, right? Just making it easy, adapting what's already there, and making it super easy for customers.
Perfect. So Brad, do you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I mean, the proliferation of really the open standards has reduced friction on really getting access to the data. Certainly performance makes it possible to do a lot of things from a workload perspective with APIs that maybe 5 years ago weren't. But yeah, we see where you used to have installs or SDKs or particular specific integrations depending on your environment. That's no longer necessary. And it really reduces the cost of ownership on the development side to be able to integrate this data and then connect it up with your own environment and bridge the gaps that used to exist across content sets. And I think that's another thing that, a data set's not that powerful if you can't connect it and be able to integrate it and be able to study it in the holistic view of like what other information you need in order to build off that research question. And so it's easier to do that now. And I think APIs have really offered the ability to clients get up and running very quickly too. There's certainly, you look at the infrastructure costs that may be involved with, procuring SQL environments and creating, batch load processes and building all that out. There's an investment up front on that and also, an operational costs. And I think you can answer a lot of questions through APIs these days.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. So Yaacov, thanks for the slides you put together. The Amazon story is amazing for me too, because first of all, the sandbox which I demonstrated, it's primarily running on the AWS ecosystem. So we are leveraging a lot of the single sign-on features and leveraging serverless functions to basically look at both authentication and authorization and provisioning various keys, permissioning, and some of the governance related aspects. To be frank, it would have taken me hundreds of developers to build out these kinds of architectures, even 5 years ago. And today it's just like componentizing and just putting together, and you have a whole workflow. And in fact, I'm teaching a class at Northeastern University, and it was a class on building out production pipelines, and we had students build it out. And within a quick 1 to 2 week period, they were able to crank out these amazing architectures. And they were all production quality, and they were scalable, and they were readily usable. And it basically had all the features which you did not have to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch. So the question for you is how is, when you were working for Yaacov Capital and other places, do you think that that's the way the world is going, wherein we are just going to be taking components and putting things together and creating these workflows and leveraging APIs as needed? And if so, where will we be in 3 to 4 years, and how will we be building applications?
Yeah, so the evolution of the cloud is it's an amazing story, right? And it's really it comes down to this concept of relentlessly pushing what doesn't add value away from you, right? And the cloud, AWS was the first guy there, right? It starts out as the ability to not have to manage your own infrastructure, right? And it was a cost play almost. That's how people were looking at it. Then all of a sudden it became this concept of being able to punch above your weight class, right? You have these new entrants coming in, similar to what you said, right? Instead of having to build out massive engineering teams, they can turn things on and compete and be at their level, have an enterprise level environment that was similar to these larger incumbents. That move of continuously pushing the value away, the commoditized items away from you, is where things are today. And you can see this always with Amazon deploying new services. And it really plays into this API concept and culture. It's the fact that you should never be reinventing the wheel, right? Back in the day when I started as a developer, this is all common sense, right? But when I started as a developer, it was, how do I go ahead and show off my Perl skills to develop something that, I know there's a library out there, but I want to do my own, right? And it evolved to, interview questions such as, what do you do if you don't know, how to do something? You want to hear people say, I will Google it, or I will go on Stack Exchange, because it doesn't pay for me to figure this out on my own. Someone else probably had the same problem, right? You need people to work smart, not hard. That is the value of the public cloud. It's being able to work smart, right? It's to constantly be able to leverage pre-existing work that someone else did in order to prop up your ability to just develop and deploy value. There was an article today, so speaking about where things are going, right? And there was an article today about Goldman Sachs, at least I read it today, I don't know if it was posted today, but Goldman Sachs, this concept of banking as a service, right? And how they understood, they re-architected the whole environment from the ground up, is the fact that they have to provide, programmatic integration and access to their banking, to their liquidity or cash, whatever you want to call it, cash management, it's got different names. so that people can plug and play for things that they want, regardless of what environment it is. That's the API concept. It's, how can I use, and especially with the serverless with AWS, how can I use this strength from AWS, deploy things in Lambda, and then connect into banking from Goldman and connect into, whatever, into somewhere else to come together to create this platform for myself based off of the services that I need. That's where, that is where things are and where things are going. It's the ability for people to pick and choose because there's programmatic and easy integration into everything, right? That's what's, it's table stakes. Companies have to provide programmatic access. Whereas when I started, it was nice when I was there. But like I said, I had to reverse engineer a lot of platforms just to integrate programmatically into them. I'm not going to name what they are because I don't want them to come after me.
Yeah. So absolutely, that's a fascinating point, right? This is an example I give to my students too. 5 years ago, if you were able to write a Jupyter notebook, you would be considered as a data scientist, and students would get amazing jobs. And today, we are talking about all these concepts of building out serverless computing, the ability to integrate various APIs, the whole revolution of the citizen data scientists, if you will. People being able to use plug and play machine learning systems and different kinds of data and services and putting together amazing workflows. The whole notion of natural language processing, which was, it's still in its infancy, I would say, but it's much more mature than what it was like a few years ago, wherein you could just basically, anybody can now think about sentiment analysis as, oh, I can just plug a couple of different points and then I have a service available. And summarization, leveraging text as as an edge in terms of you doing the analysis. So all those the way I kind of using some technical terms, the abstraction was there before. Now you have the encapsulation. You are basically encapsulating all these difficult to use concepts and then providing interfaces, which is making it available to a whole new world of programmers, analysts who may not have been able to develop those kinds of systems on their own within their enterprises. And now you basically have these available. So a question for Brad and James, in the past when I was looking at financial services data sets, I was primarily looking at data as, well, I need my global data, I need my country-specific data, I need my factor data, I need my industry data, and I would go in and basically filter and bring it in. But when I was kind of evaluating some of the various things, and on the sandbox, we basically provision data from FactSet, from Moody's, from S&P. We're trying out to integrate all these various components. And the one fascinating thing I found was access to so many machine learning as a service APIs is so simple. And many of these sentiment analysis models, many of these models which leverage alternative data sets and bringing out the geospatial aspects of it, leveraging contextual information, especially in today's day of COVID, wherein you are requiring immediate access to certain bits of information. That's also simple nowadays. So from a strategy perspective, where are you seeing the world going? Is it more of quants basically saying, well, I don't have to build things from scratch. Let me leverage the sentiment analysis API and just integrate it with my application? Or do you still think that it's the diversity and the variety of different data sets being made available to the quants, which is going to be interesting for the investment world?
Well, I guess one thing I would say first off, I just to kind of echo Yaakov's statement, right? Nobody wants to reinvent the wheel anymore, right? I think we all want to just, it's not efficient, right? So there is that mentality already, I think, in the ethos, right? Let's just use what's out there and repurpose it as we can. But let's not beat around the bush here. I think the analysis almost at this point, I don't want to say it's free or it's table stakes, but you made it clear, right? Anyone can do a machine learning model now, right? That's open source, that's available. You can pull that off the shelf and you can apply that to any data set, right? But the analysis doesn't make as much of an impact if you don't have the right data sets, right? And of course, it's in our tagline at Refinitiv. I'm not unbiased here, right? We say data is just the beginning, but you have to have quality data sets to actually be able to derive meaningful insights And when we talk in the context of alternative data, a couple little nuances that some people don't think about, right, is that first off, nobody's going to derive alpha from a single alt data set by itself. It has to be done in conjunction with something else, right? You have to put context around it. So, one data set's not going to be the magic bullet here, right? Maybe in connection with a few other data sets from different sources, but there's got to be some way to contextualize it. Secondly, there's got to be the data history there, right? You can't do a meaningful machine learning model if you don't have hundreds or ideally thousands of data points to support that, right? So just because you have a nuanced data set that maybe you have a year's worth of history on, may or may not actually be that impactful. So, I mean, from our perspective at Refinitiv, we're banking a lot on the quality of data, right? The fact that you do need to have data that people trust, right? That there's quality control around, and that's accurate. So a lot of what we do is around that workflow and starting with the data and then saying, okay, all these are the great tools that we have and technologies and techniques we can apply to that. But if you don't have the foundation there, I think maybe you won't get the outcome that you really want.
Brad, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the connectivity is huge. I mean, that's where we started Open FactSet Marketplace, which really connects a lot of this alternative data and brings it into a singular platform. And the main challenge we were seeing in the quant space was you might have access to some unique content or maybe some textual data that you have the ability to then create scores or something off of, and you want to integrate that into your system. Being able to do that efficiently and accurately throughout time and connect that back up with your security model is very difficult. And there's quite a bit of work that goes into really the symbology and the entity mappings behind that. And so we created a platform to really integrate that data and bring that all into a single, really cohesive environment and a delivery tool. And I think that's really helped be able to connect the fundamental and foundational data that you need to be, and then expand that out to the alternative. Because, as James mentioned, that data set on its own is not that valuable. Like, you need to connect that back up. And so I think, that's a big theme we're seeing. And really in the trends, like, there's a lot of buzz around alternative data, and there's a whole different, there's a whole lot of variety in the types of alternative data you can focus on. And Yaacov, your chart illustrated it beautifully. I mean, if you can get into that nascent category and you can find some data that has some edge and it's not diffused yet, and you have the ability technically to implement that, I mean, that's a gold mine. That's where you want to be. But what we're seeing really is, there's a lot more capability, demand, and really interest in the diffused portion of that spectrum, because there's still a lot of value to be had. There's still potential alpha within that space, but there's much more capability to be able to integrate that and also somewhat proven results.
Absolutely. And I think that's, I also wanted to follow up on that, Yaacov, because I think this is something we have talked about multiple times, right? The whole notion of rapid prototyping and figuring out what's like the life cycle of a data set and when does the decay start kicking in, and how do you make sure that you are leveraging the information which is going to be contextual and relevant to what your analysis is. And when do you start kind of exploring new and alternative aspects of that particular data set? And I'm kind of thinking about, like, how will the day of a quant evolve when everybody has access to all this information? And the question would be, you don't have tried and tested methods you're just going to replicate, and you want to kind of differentiate yourselves. And now you're not just working in the really large firms and the few of them which have all the technology and ecosystems. You have hundreds and thousands of fintechs coming in. Geographical barriers are no longer preventing others from kind of leveraging these opportunities. So how will the life of a quant evolve with all these aspects, and how do you see the ecosystem grow in terms of being able to build out rapidly evolving use cases and then operationalizing them?
Yeah. So am I on mute now? Okay. So the first thing is, I do want to comment on the concept of quality data, right? So I heard an analogy where it says, like, data is not like, it's not like items at a garage sale, right? Where one person's trash is another person's treasure. It's not how it works, right? Data is objectively good or bad, right? But its applicability, right? How it's applied is where it's subjective, and it's based off of the individual circumstances and needs of the organization. That's again a concept of, commodity versus not commodity, right? If it's what makes things different is what you do with the information, not necessarily the information itself. But it's just on the right side of the spectrum of that graph, right? That when it becomes fully diffused, what's actually happening there is that it becomes commonplace, right? It becomes table stakes. And it's not like you can stop doing those things because everyone will be doing it, right? When it's democratized and et cetera, and it's built into the price, it's not like you're going to say, oh, the fundamental data is diffused. I'm no longer going to look at fundamental data, right? Or at prices, or right? As things shift, that just becomes part of your table stakes model. Everyone's doing it and you need to do it. Otherwise, you're at an information disadvantage. But the problem is, right, these for the information that's not democratized, that's where the edge is. But a lot of the firms just can't compete in order to get that information, right? And the age-old example that's published out there is when Johnson & Johnson acquired, was it Actelion, I think was the name of the firm. And there were three funds. I think it was Elliott and it was Elliott, Oxif, and Eden Park that basically predicted the acquisition. But the way they did it was they started tracking flight data of the Johnson & Johnson private jets. And they were able to deduce that the location of where those private jets were going, right? What the closest place was Actelion, and that's most likely why they were going to acquire that firm. And then they basically made a ton of money on it. So the question,
mosaic theory in the CFA curriculum, right?
What was that?
The mosaic theory in the CFA curriculum.
Yes, exactly. It's not insider, right? It's proving, your theory, right? But the bottom line is that there are firms that value information that no one else has, right, and are willing to pay for it. And as soon as other people have it, they're no longer going to value it, and they'll move on to something else. And the question that you need to ask yourself is, are you able to compete with them, right? And if not, then where's the value going to come from, right? There's still a ton of value in regular fundamental analysis and in utilizing the information that you could get from we'll call it the democratic, availability of information. But if you're looking for alternative data to be a true kind of like differentiator and predictor of what you're trying to, of alpha, the guys that actually have the capital and the wherewithal to acquire that information only do so because that information is not available to anybody else, right? And they're willing to pay a premium for that. So yeah, it's a very interesting situation, right?
Absolutely. So I think we have another 8 minutes, and I want to ask about two things. And the first thing is about this whole notion of marketplace. I got pinged by someone recently, and this person said that I've been collecting a particular kind of data set for the past 3 years, and that particular data set is no longer accessible anywhere else, and I'm the only sole source, and I'm the only person who has this data, and I'm looking for a platform through which I can make that available. And would you want to partner? And this person is international. Would you want to partner with us? And then I was kind of looking at like this whole notion of API and marketplaces, wherein people are actually leveraging their specific access, or like what Yaacov, you were mentioning, potentially leveraging some intelligence on, okay, I can potentially leverage geospatial information and then mash it up with some other data set and create an alternative data set which provides some amount of information. And if you look at it, well, can you do it? Probably, but I'm going to require hundreds of thousands of dollars to put together the ecosystem of the infrastructure and build the whole thing. I may as well like buy it or source it from somewhere else rather than me generating. So how do you see this notion of marketplaces, Brad and James? Are your companies thinking about partnering with other organizations to bring in their data sets and APIs to your ecosystem so that you become the channel of delivery to their end users, or you're kind of seeding those efforts within your organization, or is that an area of growth within your organizations? How are you kind of seeing this whole notion of marketplaces within your organization?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of interest in data providers to really partner to be able to distribute their content and do that in access scale. And so that's a big part of the open FactSet marketplace is we really open up our entity and security master to be able to concord data into a highly performant and scalable delivery with the foundations that might be difficult to achieve for a data provider that has a single data set. There's some value to it, but doesn't have necessarily scale or the QA or the backend or the infrastructure to distribute that. And so, that's a partnership we've seen a ton of growth in. So we have a lot of alternative data providers that really fit that exact kind of model. And we continue to expand that. I think the interesting thing is the themes change over time. So, I mean, even in the last couple of years, like we've seen, you mentioned geospatial, I mean, certainly sentiment has its theme. We're seeing a lot of interest in ESG related content sets now. So there's a whole host of different providers that have interesting data that fits that workflow, and they're looking for a place to really distribute that and to market it. I see the marketplace. It's not a unique concept necessarily to FactSet. I mean, it's growing really everywhere. And I think it's really awesome to be able to see that type of access offered to the data providers that really need that scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not necessarily sure that we have adopted a marketplace model as much, but let's say as specific to alt data, right? We do have a pretty robust partnership with Battlefin, right? Where we provide data to them. They've onboard their data sets from their marketplace onto ours. And of course, we're always trying to develop new data sets ourselves, right? And then of course, yeah, I mean, if there is something compelling, we will absolutely step in and try to partner with them, or where if it makes sense, acquire. I mean, I think there's an open dialogue there, right? Going back to the data, I think all roads lead back to the data first, right? You get the good data, and then you can develop the analysis. So I think we're looking at all angles. I don't know that we look at it as much as a marketplace. I think the strategic view that we have is that we have a massive platform, and we want to onboard as many different content sets as we can and make those available. But again, I don't think we're thinking about it necessarily as a marketplace per se, but more of a platform that would enable that. And maybe it's semantics, right? But yeah, so I think that's how we're generally looking at it.
And the second follow-on question, and potentially, Yaacov, you could also chime in on how you think about this problem, is this whole notion of when you think about governance for any data-driven applications. So you have to factor in not only the models, but you also have to think about the versioning of the data. This particular data was available at that particular point in time, and I used it for building out this model, but then maybe the numbers, or the real numbers came out, or what we thought was the real numbers were no longer real numbers. So I had to kind of, change my model. There's a lot of governance related talk about, especially when you're thinking about connecting different APIs or connecting different data sets and building out things. And I think there was a question on the online forum too about potentially leveraging tools like, or platforms like Snowflake to facilitate not only like the sharing of the data, but also in a two-way kind of a thing wherein you could potentially say, okay, here's my snapshot, and I'm going to put it out somewhere, version it, and use it for governance. So are you seeing those kinds of use cases increase? Like, I've seen a lot of firms kind of leverage Snowflake as a mechanism for delivery. So any comments or thoughts about that?
Yeah, we've seen a ton of demand for that type of distribution. I mean, Snowflake, we have a partnership with Snowflake, and we see a ton of interest in clients being able to access data through the platform because there's multiple cloud providers, be able to integrate that in a single place, and then have necessarily, like you mentioned, copies of the data, especially as the data changes. That's really important from a research perspective, be able to represent what your research question was at the beginning, what data was utilized in that, but then be able to integrate the new content and accurately identify which applies. And so I think that that's definitely something that we're seeing as a unique feature within, within Snowflake or that type of provider. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a trend that we're seeing.
Yeah, I think it's the same on our end, and I just echo what Brad says, right? I mean, we're working with Snowflake as well, and I think it's something that customers want, and we have to respond to, right? So it'll be interesting to see where it evolves to, but clearly, there's a lot more that needs to be done to make sure that we're providing the best possibilities for customers, I guess.
Yaacov, have you looked at those kinds of systems on your end when you were managing data sets internally?
Yeah, I'll comment on Snowflake. So Snowflake is, again, it's the value there is similar to what the cloud providers in general were offering, right? It's, what they did was they separated compute from storage, completely separated, so they can scale independently. And so it's where, giving you performance where you need it, when you need it, as well as not tying your storage to the performance that you need at a very granular level. At least that's how I understood it. But it's become very, 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 very interesting proposition because a lot of firms are using, or a lot of platforms, as as James and Brad mentioned, are using it as kind of their jumping off point for what they can provide to other people. And so it's interesting to see where it is. I did not get I have not had the opportunity to play with Snowflake. I do know my brother actually is. He works at a trucking logistics company, and they're using Snowflake right now to manage their full national fleet, which is a very determining business intelligence on top of Snowflake for their full national fleet. So he's very happy and successful with it. But again, I have not tried it as of yet. What's interesting from a platform perspective, and what James and Brad were talking about Refinitiv and FactSet, is the fact that going back to the diffusing and the fully diffused data sets, being able to just have an environment where you can do the exploration, right? Easily connect to and do the exploration across multiple data sets is something that firms they previously struggled with, right? And that's the integration with multiple data sets at any given point in time that they need it. And the larger these platforms, the larger the offerings of these platforms, the better it is for the users of the platforms, right? And so, not to put down the concept of diffusing data, that data people still struggle with, right? Fundamental data, getting accurate fundamental data, people still struggle with it, right? And so being able to provide, the overlay of the specific circumstance of the firm on top of trusted and available information is definitely a good thing for the marketplace. So.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why we are building out the Q Sandbox, Yaacov, kind of trying to bring all the key aspects about the compute, the storage, and also the access to various APIs in a sandbox environment wherein you could prototype and rapidly deploy applications. So it's 1:02, and we got to call it the end of the year. And I would like to acknowledge and thank all the speakers who facilitated both the summer and the fall school. This year is very different compared to other years. With COVID-19, we're all stuck at our homes. I have my virtual background and my virtual fireplace. Depending on the mood and the thing, I can keep changing the environment. And you're all kind of, as we were discussing, Brad, you're in Chicago, Yaacov, you're in New York, James, you're in Charlotte, I'm based out of Boston. So one of the disadvantages of not being able to meet has been because of Zoom and other technologies, we've been able to make these kinds of forums feasible. Education has been democratized, the knowledge and access to various platforms have been democratized, and the cloud and other technologies have made it easier to access various modules. But I still look forward to having those in-person meetings, and I look forward to a better 2021 wherein we can continue meeting in person and have these discussions. I thank again all the speakers and the audience members for being dialing in every week to engage in this discussion and also to make knowledge and the information available to everyone in the world. I acknowledge again the support of Premier and other partners who have made these series of workshops possible. And we hope to continue this journey again in 2021. And with the Winter School, we're going to be introducing many more speakers as we continue the discussion online. Thank you so much again for taking your afternoon and spending with us. And I look forward to continuing the discussion online. Thank you, Yaacov. Thank you, Brad, and thank you, James.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Happy holidays.
To you too.
And
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.